I Am Crazy short story. Sasha breathed a heavy sigh into the glass of whiskey. She closed her eyes, relaxing as the woodsy fumes tickled her nostrils. She took a swig, the amber liquid sliding down her throat with a speed unlike any other drink. Sasha slammed her glass on the bar as she bowed her head down, allowing the alcohol to do its work. The bartender watched her carefully, a sly smile entering his full lips while he cleaned the insides of cups with a white cloth. "Long night?" he asked, setting the one he worked on back on the shelf. Sasha scoffed. "Yeah, you could say that." She hiccuped and immediately covered her mouth. "Wanna talk about it?" The bartender leaned against the counter, crossing his beefy olive arms layered into twos. His mahogany eyes twinkled as he stood, waiting like a child did for story time. Sasha shook her head, her tiny afro swaying to and fro. "Nah, it's a long story. It'll bore you. Try me." Sasha furrowed her ebony eyebrows, staring deep into the bartender's eyes for some sort of catch. When she couldn't find anything, she sighed again. "My boyfriend and I broke up," she said. She fumbled with the glass in her hands. "We've been dating for a month, but apparently that's enough to change your mind about a person." The bartender shrugged. "Do you know why he broke up with you?" he asked, straightening out his navy vest. Sasha chuckled to herself, gulping down more of her whiskey. "He says I'm crazy." Her fingers rattled against the side of her glass. "Can you believe that? You change your diet and try one thing in bed, and suddenly you're a freak show." The bartender scratched his thick, wavy beard while thinking. "Well, what did you do?" Sasha's hazel eyes narrowed behind square glasses as she pushed her cup forward. "How about you get me another whiskey, man bun, and mind your own business?" The bartender's eyes widened, his lips formed an O on his face. He grabbed the glass from the table and retreated to the other customers down the counter. Sasha slammed her head down. The bar was awfully quiet, occupied only by a few murmured voices and "Come On Eileen" playing in the background. The stall below Sasha threatened to throw her off, squeaking with every attempt she made to move. She wrapped her hand around her afro ponytail, and she gave it a long and forlorn squeeze as she sat by herself. "If it makes you feel better, I don't think you're crazy." Sasha perked up from the counter and turned to see where the voice came from. At the end of the row to her left sat a man hardly out of college. His beige trench coat accentuated his broad shoulders as they rose and fell. His bright and fiery hair swirled neatly into a pompadour, and his jade eyes crinkled as his lips formed a soft grin. Sasha completely turned to face him, resting her elbow on the table. "You sure about that?" The mystery man shrugged. "Trust me," he said before swallowing his margarita. When he set down the glass, a lime jolted from its place in the ice. "I've dated a lot of crazy girls, and you don't look like any of them." Sasha gave a sheepish smile, readjusting the glasses on her long oval face. "Thanks." A moment of awkward silence passed between them. "Come On Eileen" had stopped played and was promptly replaced by Mr. Brightside. The man cleared his throat. "The name's Finn, by the way." "Sasha," she murmured. Another silence. Finn's eyes were fixed on the glass in her hand, now devoid of any more whiskey. He pointed at it, using his other hand to cup his freckle-clad cheek. "Can I buy you another drink?" he asked. Sasha gave him a blank stare, unaware of what he was talking about. Her gaze alternated between her hands and Finn before laughter escaped from her plump lips. "Oh, no, no." She pushed the glass away from her, shaking her head. Her afro followed the movements of her body. "I was actually about to go home. I've had a lot to drink." Pursing his lips, the man dropped his head down at his drink. As he swirled his glass around, a quiet "oh" left his mouth. Sasha's eyebrows rose. "But if you want, we can get out of here. I'd love to have you for dinner." Finn's head swerved back in her direction, his lips curling into a wide and goofy smile. "Yes." Sasha jumped in her seat. Finn, realizing what he did, turned into a bright tomato. "Oh, sorry, not like, well, I mean," he sputtered. She burst into laughter. He stopped himself and took a deep breath before continuing. "What I meant to say is, that would be nice." It was Sasha's turn to smile. Great. This guy was the definition of cute. She studied every detail on his body, from his button nose to his pearly whites to the way his pecs showed under his evergreen sweater. As the two of them stood up from the counter, she noticed how full his pants were. She smiled to herself. The two made their way out of the bar, and as Finn held the door open for her, Sasha felt the bartender's piercing stare watching her every move. The night was bursting with energy. Cars and trucks hurried down the city streets, each with its own purpose and tight deadline to beat. Street lamps loomed over the sidewalk, oozing rays of light onto the bustling crowd below. A sudden chill rushed onto Sasha and she hugged herself, trying to conserve the little heat she had in her frail body. Catching her shivers in the corners of his eye, Finn took off his trench coat and wrapped it over her grey turtleneck. Sasha looked up at him. "You don't need your coat. It's pretty cold." He shrugged. "I've dealt with much worse," he responded, his words becoming condensation in the frozen air. Sasha blushed. Right then, a taxi approached the bar where they stood. Before it could pass by, Finn raised his hand and signaled to the taxi. It bobbed and weaved through traffic until stopping right in front of them. The driver rolled down his window. He was a middle-aged man, the very epitome of fatigue with his 5 o'clock shadow and bloodshot eyes. He pulled down his ascot cap, revealing the strings of graying hair left on his head. The driver leaned out of the window, and in a deep, grating voice he said, "Where you guys headed?" 800 Point Avenue, Sasha answered, her fingers wrapping around the door handle. The door opened, and she slipped inside with Finn right behind her. The driver, grunting to himself, placed the ascot back on his head and stepped on the gas pedal. Sasha put her arm around Finn's and slid closer to him. Finn looked away, attempting to hide his reddening face. "Tell me about yourself," Sasha whispered into his chest. Finn shrugged, feeling the weight of the woman on his shoulder. Let's see. I'm 23, just got out of college for journalism, and, do you work out?" Sasha intervened, rubbing her caramel fingers around Finn's arms. He furrowed his eyebrows as he gave a reluctant chuckle. "Yeah, there's a Lifetime Fitness near my apartment." He watched Sasha cuddle against him, her hands traveling up and down his chest while she played with his sweater. "How far is your place?" Sasha rested her chin where her hand was and looked out the taxi window. The lights started to thin out, and the tall buildings were gradually replaced with trees. Soon, the taxi arrived at a quintessential urban neighborhood. The houses squeezed against each other, like books at a library lined perfectly on shelves. "We're almost there," Sasha answered. She closed her eyes, relaxing herself against Finn's body heat. In the span of a few minutes, the cab slowed to a graceful stop. Sasha peeled herself off of Finn and opened the door. Finn followed her, crawling over the back seats and scrambling out of the taxi. She stood in the cold, laughing, before walking up the path to the tiny house. "Hurry up! Would you rather freeze in the cold or stay warm with me?" Finn's eyes nearly popped out of his head. "Right behind you," he called out. He dusted off his black pants and started making his way to Sasha when he heard a low whisper. He stopped. The whisper came back, and when Finn spun around he realized it was the driver. His bloodshot eyes darted around while he beckoned with a stubby hand. Finn pointed at himself. "Yes, you. Come here," the taxi driver hissed. Finn checked behind him. Sasha was at the top of the steps, fishing through her large burgundy purse. Finn stared back at the driver and, after sighing, shuffled over to the window. "What do you want? I wouldn't go in there if I was you." "Why? Look, I know this chick. Every couple o' nights, she brings a dude back to her place. And every time, the chap is never seen again." The boy scoffed. "What are you saying? She's a murderer or something?" The driver grabbed Finn's sweatshirt and pulled him closer. "What I'm saying is that chick's bad news." He threw him back on the sidewalk. "I'm looking out for you, kid. I've been round these parts for a long time. You walk into that house, and you end up like every other unexpecting guy before you." "Finn," Sasha hollered from her small porch, her hand on the now open door. She was tiny compared to the trenchcoat, almost as if she was swimming in an endless sea of beige. Finn blushed again as he was looking at her. She was adorable and mousy and everything he could like in a girl. He brushed back his orange locks, smiling while naughty images invaded his mind. He turned back to the cab driver, whose eyes, previously hardened, were now a soft gray color. "Don't say I didn't warn you." And with that, the taxi pulled away from the curb. Finn watched the cab zoom down the quiet street until it became a mere dot on the horizon. Rubbing his hands, he dashed up the gravel until he was beside Sasha. "What were you even doing?" she asked as the two of them entered the house. Finn shook his head. "Don't worry about it. She had a quaint home." Toffee couches formed a circle in the living room, surrounding a cluttered wood table. Paintings of various sizes filled the white walls, ranging from landscapes and portraits to surreal and abstract art. In the corner was a large bookshelf teeming with literature both old and new. An ornate chandelier drooped over the table, and as they made their way through the room, the glass pieces twinkled to whatever light they could get a hold of. But what really caught Finn's eye was above one of the couches. He drifted to the far end of the room, and, very gently, caressed one of the horns protruding from the wall. Sasha eyed him, and once she got close she wrapped her arms around him. "You like it?" she murmured into his ear. "I got it from a hunting expedition. I like staring at it to remind myself of who I really am." Finn continued to marvel at the deer skull, following every tiny bump, dent, and scratch. Releasing her grip, Sasha clapped her hands together. "You go ahead and make yourself comfortable. I'll go set myself up." The pixie of a woman disappeared down a hallway, leaving Finn alone with the skull. Finn plopped down on the couch. Peeling off his Oxfords, he took another look around the room. It amazed him how one person could have a whole house to herself. And no messes. This living room was cleaner than his entire apartment on a good day. Finn's gaze fell to the table before him. There was an old book sitting dejected on the corner. He picked it up. Wear and tear made the cover feathery in his hands. He flipped through, scanning through the pages until he found something. Flipping back, he found red splotches decorating one of the pages. Finn traced his fingers over the stains. The page was still wet in those areas, and out of curiosity he lifted the book to his nose. Metallic. He immediately closed the book and set it back on the table. He was imagining things. That couldn't have been what he thought it was. All of a sudden, sensual music played at a high volume throughout the house. Finn whirled his head around as Sasha returned. Instead of the turtleneck, she wore a blank black t-shirt a couple sizes too large. Finn glanced at her legs, gulping when he realized she wasn't wearing any pants. Sasha tied a white handkerchief around her neck and allowed it to drape over her, like a baby wearing a bib. The young boy furrowed his eyebrows. "I thought you were making dinner," he spoke, attempting to hide his nerves with a chuckle. Sasha continued to advance him, as if none of his words had registered. She crawled atop the couch, edging closer and closer to Finn. Perspiration ran down his forehead. "Sasha, I'm sorry, what was that?" she asked while she straddled him. Her fingers slid under his evergreen sweater. "Dinner? Didn't you say you were having me for dinner?" Sasha grabbed onto the sweater, and for some unknown reason he allowed her to pull it off him. "Oh, right. About that." Sasha reached over the edge of the couch, fishing around while never breaking contact with Finn's green eyes. He watched her pull something out, and he could swear something silver twinkled in her hand. She lifted the object high into the air, cocked her head, and grinned. "What I meant to say is, you are my dinner." And at the moment that Finn realized she had a knife, it was already on its way down. Sasha sighed into her martini. The clear liquid swished back and forth in her hand, juggling the green olives it had in its midst. The bartender stared at her, wiping the glass in his hand. His large, brunette beard hid the frown on his face, but his eyes were able to tell the whole story. Sasha downed the martini in one go, slammed down the glass, and gazed longingly at the bartender. "You probably think I'm crazy, coming into this bar all the time," she remarked, her speech slightly slurring. The bartender shrugged. "I'm more worried about what you do out there than in here," he said. Sasha kept her eyes on him, her gaze as icy and cold as the weather outside. After a while, she scoffed before looking back down at her glass. "You don't look crazy to me." Resting her head on her hand, she looked over at where the comment came from. An Asian man sat not too far from her at the counter. He had on brown pants and a white shirt made tight by his swollen muscles. "I don't," Sasha murmured. The guy shook his head, a toothy grin plastered on his face. Sasha smiled to herself. "Good." Her finger rose to her mouth. A piece of Finn lodged itself in her teeth, and with a couple swipes she finally got it out. "That's perfect." Do subscribe the channel and press on the bell icon for more updates. Like the video, share and comment below. Thank you for watching.